All right, fact check this podcast, and I am there. It is.
So it's like get dressed before you play basketball. Like people take like 10 minutes to put their socks and shoes on.
See, this is what happens when I do the morning show from the road, and then I sit down at my desk and think I'm ready to go, but I'm actually not ready to go because I haven't been here all morning. So
you feel a little flustered, do you?
Yes. Yes,
It's just me.
I'm a bit OCD. I'm a creature of habit, and when my routines are disrupted, I don't handle that sort of stuff real well. But so
it's just me. It's not like you have some important guest on. You have the guy on. You have on every other month.
Well, maybe more frequently than that.
Yeah, I lose track.
You're becoming a regular.
Your hair is not done though, which just kind of offends me.
I mean, I brushed my beard. Is that?
I guess that's good enough. But I mean, Pete had the whole like get up and everything yesterday.
Well, I'm terribly sorry.
You were probably wearing mascara too.
No, I don't do that. We'll get into that because that does tie into.
I was going to say
that does tie into the topics we're going to be talking about.
Your autobiography might have been burned.
Maybe. Speaking of, so yesterday, Pete and I talked about the Nazi book burnings and what they were burning, why they were burning it, and some of the significance of that. Both looking at what was going on at the time with the burning of those books, and also some similarities to modern culture and society and what's going on in our current day and age. So you and I are going to look a little more at just the historical, how did they get to that point stuff, from moving from end of World War I up through Mussolini and Italy, especially since that's been a kind of a popular topic with the election of Meloni in Italy last week, and then Weimar Germany and what all was going on that kind of led to the rise of the National Socialists and why that was an accepted thing. I had talked about Hillary Clinton was interviewed on something. I can't remember what it was, but she was talking about remembering being younger and watching videos of like Hitler giving speeches, and all of these people were really excited, and she was like, what could have brainwashed them into thinking that this was a good idea? And then she's watching this Trump rally in Ohio, and it just feels like the same thing, given the same vibes. It's like, well, bitch, you obviously don't know much about history, because if you did, you would understand why all of that happened back then. And you would also understand why it looks sort of similar to things that are happening today, because there are a lot of stark similarities. So let's start with the kind of the end of World War I, moving into the 20s and 30s, and just what was happening specifically in Europe. And the U.S. was kind of, to a small extent, removed from some of that stuff, but the U.S. was also driving a lot of it in Europe as well. Like, we were playing a part. It wasn't so much affecting the U.S. at that time, but it was the role that the U.S. was playing in Europe was really changing things in that part of the world.
Speaking to Hillary Clinton's speech, and obviously she's not shocked about why things are happening the way they are, but she wants her audience or her supporters to be just absolutely appalled. There's this account on Twitter, an anonymous account called Kofefe Anon. I don't know if you follow him. So he has this saying where he talks about how the woke are a lot more like honest or right than the mainstream. And one of the things that applies here is when you hear, it is more wokey people who say stuff like, oh, they're Trump supporters are Nazis or they're fascists or whatever. Like Trump himself obviously is not a Nazi or a fascist, but the sort of grassroots, ground level, like people who support him were the ones who were actually like more intrigued by things that were being said in 1920s leading into 30s Germany by the National Socialists. So this is where they're actually more correct than like what people want to like give in. We make fun of people being called Nazis all the time. They're not Nazis, but there's a sort of kinship there for what they're like kind of long for with their nation, if that makes sense.
Well, and the interesting thing about that is like when they say Nazi, what they mean is like
1940s.
Yes, 1940s gassing Jews Nazi. Whereas when we think of Nazi, we're thinking of like 1930s response to rampant degeneracy and just total degradation of society. So like there are some very major distinctions that have to be made when throwing around terms like that.
Yeah, and you can see I have the book that P referenced last night. This is Joseph Goebbels' journal. It's funny. I actually have I highlighted and dog-eared the portion that he read from last night or yesterday afternoon. The one about abortion. I may have sent it to him, so maybe that's where. I'm sure he has his own copy.
He when I told him that we were doing this conversation, he said, "Oh, he's good." So
you brought up Italy though. Yes. I don't know a whole lot about pre-Mussolini Italy. So I don't like I like to talk about Mussolini as my hero, some of its tongue in cheek and stuff, but I'm actually not like super well versed in what Italy looked like. But it's interesting that you brought up like all of Europe, and you and Pete talked about this last night. France was actually veering towards fascism itself, like in the 1930s as well. And there's actually even more. There's this like a normie historian called Paul Johnson. He has a book that's called Modern Times, and it's basically world history, mostly like political history from 1920 to 1990. And it talks about how France was perhaps even more like I'm not say just anti-Semitic, like anti-bankers in the 1920s and 30s than even Germany was at that time. But the issue with France was they were already like a crumbling republic. Like by the time World War I came around, and Germany, like there's this book called Storm of Steel by Ernst Jünger. He was a soldier for Germany during World War I, and he talks about how when he was fighting in France, like these little French boys would be like, "Yeah, we want you guys to win." so France was like pretty much done for by that time, and then obviously when World War II rolled around, like France gave up easily. Like this is a pretty mainstream thing. So they weren't. I think they were kind of veering towards fascism, but they also had the allyship with the U.S. and with Britain at the time, which kind of prevented them from completely falling into, I don't want to say falling into, going into fascism, unlike what happened with Germany.
So what you're saying is France didn't give up because they were a bunch of pussies. France gave up because they were like, "Yep, we like this. Come on. Like, yeah. we're not going to fight it."
Yeah, and I think was it World War II when the first people firing? Pete said this yesterday, where it was like the French soldiers firing on the U.S. soldiers at first.
Yeah,
or a certain like sect of the French soldiers.
Well, and also, so talking about that, like something else that we had talked about was how Spain and Portugal were largely left alone, and that's because when you're looking at the rise of communism in the West and what that kind of meant, especially across Europe, and the globalist mindset of communism, and communism is very destructive towards the family, very destructive towards religion, like all of the really core tenets of really National Socialism, and or today's what would be today's national populism type stuff, or populist nationalism, whatever you want to call it. White power, white supremacy. When you look at all of that stuff, like what Spain and Portugal had in spades, was they were very, very traditional, strong Catholic nations. So the family unit and the morals and values and all of that were incredibly important to those people. So the communistic creep really wasn't affecting those countries because they were so rooted in those things. So they would be natural allies, or at the very least not enemies of National Socialism at that time, because they're not part of the communist regime. Like they're not falling like the rest of Europe kind of was at the time.
I think a mistake that we make, or just like most like mainstream people make, with regard to communism and like National Socialism, is they like immediately go to the economics, where both of these ideologies are like more culture first than their sort of economic principles or whatever. And not National Socialism is obviously it's blood and soil, right? Like it talks about your nation's, I don't know, history. It respects your nation's history and the people who have lived there for a long time, what they built. Whereas communism's like all about degenerating the culture, which is what you guys talked about. And there is no like homogenous culture in communism. Like it's less, obviously it is like the whole like distribution of everything goes into that, but it's more about just like creating this global homo situation and not like necessarily about like all about the economics of it. But we always like we've been kind of taught after the 20th century to only look at, or to specifically look at, like what were the economic principles of all these different ideologies.
Okay, so I guess on that point, I kind of think of the National Socialist ideology and framework as, which we've talked about this several times, maybe not on this show, but definitely on the morning show. Like think of the covenant community type things, or the Amish, the way that like you could argue that the way they structure their communities, it's very socialistic, but it's also very rooted in community. It's very rooted in faith and morals and virtues and things that are good. So like, yeah, there's a socialistic type of an aspect to it, but it's that covenant community type of a socialism. You know, it's not it's not Bernie Sanders style socialism where everybody has to be forced to do it. It's everybody's doing it because that's what works for everybody and actually benefits the greater good of your community and your society. And that's like, there's a huge distinction between the two that the democratic socialists here in the U.S. just don't seem to understand. Like they think socialism is a great thing, so you should force it on everybody. It's like, it doesn't work if you force it on everybody. That's kind of the point.
I feel like whenever we get together, borders usually comes up. And I think even like with Bernie back in the day, he used to say he was closed borders, and he would have to be if he wanted the things that he espouses to actually work. Like you can't be like open borders and also a democratic socialist, whatever that means. Like this is why obviously Germany wanted to expel certain folks, and they were like super about strong borders as well, because their form of National Socialism wouldn't have worked if they just kind of let people in and out willy-nilly.
Well, and that's something that we have talked about with like Germany with Sweden and the different Nordic countries, and the countries that are the Americans' democratic socialists example of like socialism working. It's like, yeah, but those countries are super, super, super closed borders. Like they're incredibly restrictive. Have you ever checked out application to immigrate to Sweden. Like, there's a good chance, even if you check all of the boxes, they're still not going to let your ass in. Like, these things don't work with open borders. It's not feasible. It is a very community driven type of thing. Like, everybody's got to be on the same page, or it doesn't work.
And there's really not a distinction between, or not that it doesn't seem like a big distinction between a sort of global homo socialist worldview and a free market one. Like, we see what happens when we want to extend like the free market to the world. It doesn't seem to work as well either. The whole thing about the US being the world's policeman is they're basically sort of the arbiters for global free trade. And that results in proxy wars throughout. So anyways, borders are good no matter what. no matter what economic system you have.
I mean, it makes sense if you look at the issues that we have in the U.S. with corporations kind of running everything, and like what we have isn't actually capitalism. It's this horrible form of corporatism where the corporations and government have gone hand in hand. Like, and that is the worst form of fascism, honestly. Like, that's the purest definition of fascism, is the corporations and the government are intertwined to the extent that they're indistinguishable from each other. That's what we have, and that's, like, clearly you can see where borders would be a good thing. Like, there have to be lines drawn between, like, not everything can be commingled, which is what the global homo thing kind of is it's everything should just kind of merge into this one thing. It's communism taken to its full fruition, like all the way to completion, which is interesting that communism is the thing, and Russia seems to not be so much the bastion of communism anymore. When you look at Putin and the way things are going now, history does have a weird way of playing itself out. So let's get back to late 20s, early 30s, Germany and Europe, and what's going on over there that kind of leads us to the rise of the National Socialists.
I have a book. I'm kind of surprised that they were selling it on Amazon. And it's basically, I can't remember the name of the newspaper. It's a German newspaper that ran from, I believe, 1925 to basically through the war years. And it has like all of the cartoons that were depicted in this newspaper. This was a National Socialist newspaper. And one thing about like cartoons, and today it's more like memes, is they present, like, they kind of like are outlandish forms of reality until they actually aren't outlandish anymore. They kind of predict like what's coming in a very like funny and sometimes a sad humorous way. These cartoons did this for Germany back then, and like there's one about like how there's like there's a depiction of like bankers, and you can imagine like how the banker looks in this cartoon, and how he's like promoting porn and debt and just basically capital. And like beneath this banker, he's like squashing, like, I don't know what she's considered, like the queen of Germany, like this old queen, beautiful woman of Germany, like basically crushing the culture of Germany. So it kind of shows what you and Pete were talking about last night, about how the culture had just completely degenerated into focus on porn and these weird scientific distortions that they were doing. And one way to be able to like see that in not real time, but see what the everyday Germans were seeing, is to look at like the cartoons of the day, less about the cartoons and more about cartoons and even like the speeches of Goebbels or Hitler, because that kind of like hit the nitty gritty. So it was definitely a degenerative culture. And like, it's true that a lot of it did stem from Treaty of Versailles. Inflation was wild, but you can't like focus on just the horrible economy of Germany and just completely neglect like what was going on in the streets as far as like prostitution, porn, all this stuff. Like both of those, you have to talk about both of those things when you talk about the rise of the Nazis. And like what we were taught, we were only taught about devastation of war, and they neglected culture.
Isn't that kind of the story of the history books as it's presented to us? Though it always
Yeah.
neglects culture. Like as I've gotten older and understand the importance and the value of culture, and realizing how frequently that's left out, like they don't talk about they don't talk about the culture of Spain and Portugal and the strong family ties, the strong Catholic ties that those countries had, and with that being why they were largely left alone by the Nazis in their march through Europe. Like they don't talk about the cultures of these communistic countries and how they largely eschewed family and faith and all of those sorts of things, and the rampant degeneracy that was running through all of Europe at the time, and culture is one of those things that if you discount its value and its importance to what's going on in the world at any given point in history, like you are missing a large piece of the puzzle.
It's interesting. I brought this up on our morning show a little bit ago. Like I read a Hitler biography at 11 years old, but I remember like even before like reading that biography, like when I was first learning about the Holocaust and the Nazis and World War II, like everyone, like every boy, typically every boy is like interested in what went down there. But I was like more, even at a young age, I remember being more interested in like how that came about and not necessarily what happened. I was like, so how did this guy, for no reason at all, rise to power, right? Like this is what we're given. Unless like it's either that or it's like we were talking about, like the economic situation of Germany at the time. But I, at a young age, like I didn't really accept that answer. And that's why I was interested in like delving into the actual history of Weimar Germany, because there's a lot more than just Hitler was a really good speaker and he knew how to like sway people, which he knew how to sway people, but you got to be able to have something to back up your swaying. And there was a lot of stuff that was presented, or there's a lot of stuff that he could use to sway because the culture was so fake at the time. And he was promoting two very real things in blood and soil, and also like national heritage. Like these are things that people not only can feel, but you can actually like see it. And this was like what the Nazi art was at the time. You guys were talking about art. You watch the documentary? I can't remember her name. The real like propaganda one. You know what I'm talking about? It was made in Nazi Germany, and it presents like fascism as like this very strong authoritative force, strength of the will or something of the will, triumph of the will. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember what the name of it is either.
That was
I know what you're talking about.
I kind of like looked into her life, and she wasn't even like super ideological like Nazi person. Like she just wanted to create something beautiful, and she made a documentary that presented the Nazis as, like I said, strong and willful people. And this was during a time of abstract art and trying to turn men into women and women into men. And even people who maybe aren't super strong ideologically one way or the other, like they still get a sense of what's real and what's fake. And the Nazis were presenting something that was closer to real than what the commies were.
I mean, you're seeing that today.
Yeah. This is like, or yesterday was like the last day of like every 2 years in the city that I live, there's this thing called Art Prize. And a lot of people, and mostly local people, like present the art that they make or whatever in different venues around the city. The last time I went was, I think it was 2018 was the last time I went. And they used to do it every year. They changed it to every other year because not as many people were coming. I think not as many people were coming is because the art sucked. Like everything was about abstract. Take from this what you will. There's like no meaning, or you can portray any meaning, or you can like derive any meaning from it that you want. Like that is the art and the architecture of today, and that's probably what was happening during that time in Germany and in these other places as well. So this place is, and I haven't gone to this art prize thing this year because it is awful like art, and I don't think, like, I drive around the city and I don't think people are going as much anymore either. So there is this sense of maybe like maybe not like explicit understanding of a longing for something real over the fakeness of today, but I think it's going to get more and more real as things get crazier and crazier.
Well, that's something that I can't remember if it was on my show or if it was on the on 2Bit's Friend or Fed episode a couple weeks ago where we talked about Peter Thiel. But like one of the things that you're seeing societally is art is all starting to devolve into this real basic ugly thing. And somebody was trying to make the argument that why is this thing ugly and this thing isn't? It's like if you don't think that this one that is like ornate and interesting and like unique is actually like a better, nicer thing than this just basic blocky ugliness that I can pull 7,000 other images of that all mirror it perfectly. Like if you don't think that this is more aesthetically pleasing than that, you've got the brain bug. Like they've succeeded in like dulling you down to not seeing real beauty in this world. And I mean that's what it is. Like that's the global homo ideal, is that it is all uniform. Everybody is unique and perfect and different in their exactly perfect structured like playbook. Like they fall perfectly into the column of unique, where that you are all unique in the exact same way. There is no actual diversity. There is all just perfect uniqueness of uniformity.
Yeah, it just presents itself as a mess. And someone might quibble with like that propaganda documentary by the German lady as being necessarily art, because I'm pretty much of the belief that like right-wing art isn't necessarily political propaganda in our direction or whatever. But what that film did is it did present like form and strength. And I think these are things that are realities of like all time. And this was presented at a time when the commies were basically trying to propagate a weak nation. So I think it was art in that it presented something that was completely opposite to the sort of distorted views or distorted propaganda of the time.
Well, that's like speaking of the strength versus the weakness. Like Hitler's speeches weren't like super great, you know what I mean? But the way he delivered it, the message that he was delivering,
there's
like,
art in performance. Yeah.
It was something that hit people. Like it struck people as strong and authoritative, and in a time when everything was squishy and they needed that. It's the same for Maloney. When you listen to her speeches and stuff like that, they are meaningful. They're
even the 2016 Trump. I mean, he couldn't talk well, but there was something that really struck a chord with people.
When he got up there and he started, his speeches were not like, they were not anything that was,
they weren't super coherent, but they were authoritative.
And the things he said struck a chord with the people that he was talking to. It's, if you can get up there and you can command an audience and you can say things that people feel, that people can look around at the degradation of society and understand, like, these things aren't good. We like instinctively, we know these aren't good. And then you've got somebody that's saying, hey, look, it's not just you. Like, this is fucked up.
Yeah.
And other people see it. And we need to do something about it. That like that strikes a chord with people, that hits a nerve, and it's like, yeah, okay, I'm not batshit crazy. Like the gay rom-com that we were talking about on the morning show today, like, people are seeing that stuff, and it's like, it's just not for me. This is just not, like, this is not something I'm interested in. This stuff is a perversion of nature. This is not what we should be doing as a species. And then when you've got, like, all of the mainstream, all of the like popular culture, because if we go back to the 30s and we look at like Weimar Germany and all of that, like the popular culture was all of this squishy trans promotional, gay promotional, strong porn, low values, low morality type of stuff. Like this was the popular thing. This was the pop culture of that day. It's the same fucking way that it's the pop culture of today. And all when you have somebody strong step up and start to speak out against that, then you see like other people hear that and go participate and start cheering in these rallies. And then the more people see that, the more people start to realize, okay, I'm not the crazy one here. Like this is actually a thing. Yeah. Maybe we should get behind this. And you're starting to see that happen to some extent now. Across Europe, especially, and to a smaller degree here in the United States.
When I say that like Trump's base is closer to like the people who were most friendly towards like the sort of Nazi or National Socialists in the late 20s, early 30s. Like, I'm not talking about Republicans in 2004 who were ready to kill a bunch of Muslims after 9/11 or whatever. Like, they're a part of it, but they're also working class union people who voted Democrat all their life. Like in the UP of Michigan, right? Like they don't want to lose their jobs to some foreign country. And so it's a combination of like the sort of red-blooded American as well as the blue dog, like working class guy who make up not only like this sort of national populist movement that we see here today, but also that made up the movement that we saw in Germany, Spain, Italy, all these places. It's, in one sense, it is more ideological, and in another, it's like less ideological. And I think there are actually people who wore masks and received the jab like very recently who will see like the promo for Bros or whatever that stupid movie's called and be like, wait, this is going a little too far. Like people that we would have been making fun of for the last 2 years being like, okay, like things are getting a little too like crazy now. Like I think you and Pete were talking about yesterday, like kids are watching football and they're seeing the ad for Bros during the commercials. And all you have to do is watch that ad and be like, I don't want my kid to like watch that. There's something weird going on with that. And this is why I'm like against that movie. But at the same time, like, okay, keep like pushing a little bit keep pushing a little harder because things are going to turn if you keep doing this.
Well, that's there's been a lot of conversation about the drag queen story hours and the like taking kids to drag shows. I've talked about it a little bit. Trans communion in the Methodist Church, and like the United States Methodist Church has really strayed from biblical fundamentals and actual theology, and which is creating a huge schism within the Methodist Church here in the U.S. and less so across the globe, because most of the global Methodist Church actually aligns with theology and biblical teaching, not with woke propagandist bullshit. So, like I said, that's something I've written about in my Substack, and the way that split is all happening. But like trans communion is becoming a thing, and the more this stuff is happening, the more it is starting to create these rifts, the more it's starting to create these schisms where people who, like you were saying, like wore the mask and got the jab and did all of that stuff. As this continues to get pushed further and further, they're like, I can't keep agreeing with this stuff. Like, there's a line has to be drawn in the sand. It's like the guy, I mention this book all the time, but The Coddling of the American Mind. Like, the guys who wrote that are leftists, but if you just read that book on its face, or listen to the two of them like reading the book, the audio version of it, you would think they were a couple like MAGA Trump right wingers, just based on the content of the book. Like, you would think that they're a bunch of right wingers, but they're leftists. But like, things got pushed to the point that they had to take a step back and be like, this is not good. Like, this is going too far, and there has to be a line drawn in the sand somewhere. And that's what a lot of college professors have been running up against in recent years. Like, you have the commie ideologues that are the large majority of college professors, communist professors, same thing, of college professors. But then you also have large numbers of professors who are leaving the state university structure and going to like private smaller schools and doing stuff like that, because they do understand that there's a line that has to be drawn, and you can't do that at the state level, at the state college and state university level, because they are going to push this agenda, and they understand that it is exactly that. It is an agenda, and you're seeing that across industry really as a whole, like education especially, but just industry as a whole. You're starting to see the schisms developing, where there are people on both the right and the left who are looking at what's going on, and they're like, all right, this has gone too far. It's time to pump the brakes and get out of this, because like there are fundamental black and white, like, morality exists. There is an objective morality that exists in the universe, and lines are getting crossed that shouldn't be crossed.
And they're not turning to the neither right nor left libertarian party. Just got what they're veering towards actually is, I mean, it's as simple as order. Like, we see the mess, we see the gross art of today, the gross architecture, just the anything goes culture of today, and what people will gravitate towards when things get too chaotic is order. And so that's where you see that base, both in Nazi Germany and in like national populism today. Whereas the people who say like that there needs to, I mean, so the Nazis were a third party, but not a third party in the way that the LP is. People who want to like promote the LP are going to like give this whole like we're the Switzerland of World War II, right? Of 1930s into 1940s Germany. But what you don't like really get into with Switzerland is the reason they're neutral is because of the banking class they have in there, who is providing the funds for both sides. So this is, when you like look into the history of Switzerland, they're not necessarily neutral. Like, this is just where all the money is stored.
Right. They're not being left to remain neutral because they don't have value to either side. They're being left as neutral because they have so much value to both sides. Neither side is willing to fuck with that. Like,
yeah.
It's like, okay, do we go in here and try to like play dictator and then have them just divert all of the funds to our enemy? Like, or do you just leave them alone? And and the LP doesn't have any funds at all. That's why they fight, just to get ballot access. So
you brought up the trans communion movement or whatever in Methodism. This is kind of where the Jewish portion well, obviously banking commies, Jews who view Goyim view Gentiles as Goyim. Like, this is kind of where this comes into the picture, because they've tried to kill people of that mold, like try to kill God in any way that they can, or kill Jesus in any way they can. I mean, they literally crucified Jesus at one point. But now what's happening is, instead of killing Jesus, they're essentially killing Jesus by making him out to be whatever people want him to be. So Jesus was gay. Jesus accepted me as a trans. Jesus was a trans himself, whatever it
Yeah,
be.
that's
Like, this is a way to create an even bigger, like, distorted, chaotic mess.
what I've focused a lot of my Substack stuff on, is looking at that sort of stuff. I talked about like the it's not my Jesus and the whole buddy Jesus mentality of stuff. Like, I talked about that in yesterday's Substack. Like, yeah, the way that they have perverted and distorted Christianity is a travesty. But looking at, like, if you want to talk about the Bible, if you look historically at the Bible, like, every time that their culture started to denigrate into this type of degenerate behavior, they had to have the rising up of a strong king that basically cracked the whip and forced them back into submission to God and getting things right and restoring the values and principles that were their culture and society. This is not something that's just been happening over the last 100 years. This is something that's been happening all throughout human history. Is you have the fall of culture into degeneracy, and then you have the rise of strong leaders to bring you back out of that. It's the whole weak men make bad times make strong men.
Yeah. And people intuitively know that this isn't like who Jesus is, or who, like, the God of the Bible, like, really is. Even if they don't know how to, like, put it into words, like you were mentioning Spain and Italy as, like, strong Catholic countries, and they always have been. And that's probably a reason why they gravitated towards fascism, because it wasn't Catholicism isn't a formless form of the Christian religion. I've got my issues with Catholicism, but it's pretty good at building up borders in many ways.
Yeah, a lot of the Protestant faiths that have moved away from the more Catholic foundations are the ones that seem to be the most squishy, and the ones that seem to kind of devolve into some of this, buddy Jesus type of mentality. Whereas, although it is disappointing to see both the Methodist Church and the Presbyterian Church, both over the last 8 to 10 years, have really strayed into trying to be popular as opposed to trying to be.
There's nothing methodical about the Methodist Church anymore.
Right. At least not from the perspective of the U.S. Methodist Church. Like, you can still find which is the schism. Like, there are the traditional Orthodox type Methodist churches that are breaking away from the U.S. Methodist Church, while the U.S. Methodist Church takes more of the path of the popular, pop culture type of prosperity gospel and buddy Jesus for everything. And it's the same thing that happened to the Presbyterian Church following Obergefell. The Presbyterian Church started to allow gay pastors. It started to allow pastors to conduct gay marriages, all of that stuff. And the church saw its numbers drop. I can't remember what it was. I think it was over like a 4-year period, like 40. They lost like 40% of their membership, and the reason they were losing that membership is because they were splintering off and forming Presbyterian churches that didn't affiliate with the United Presbyterian Church. And so, and that's the same thing you're seeing with the Methodist Church now. Is they've been able to kick the can down the road a little bit further, but it's ultimately come to that. And I mean, that's the downfall of the U.S. church right now. And it's the oh God, what's the word I'm looking for? Where subversion. It's the subversion from like the global homo or from like if you're looking at in the 20s and 30s, like the communist influence. This is the global homo influence of you want everything to be squishy and meaningless. That way, everything just becomes uniform. And so if every church is squishy and doesn't stand by any type of conviction or principle, then they're not a threat. The American Christianity as a whole is not a threat to global homo in any way. Like, you need strong Orthodox churches, you need a strong Catholic church, and you need strong like independent churches that are centered on evangelism and theology, to not just to be good on what they're teaching, but to be culturally relevant and create a strong uprising of like true Christian power. And I don't know what it takes to get that to happen. I like, the National Socialists kind of replaced the church in that fashion in Germany, whereas that was sort of the power structure in Spain and Portugal. And so something that is strong and concrete with well-defined rules and boundaries and a coordinated structure of power, like that's what kind of breaks this bullshit. Yeah, Trey says the Baptists have been pretty resilient, but there's hard opposition within the big churches. Like, if you keep up with the Southern Baptist Convention year over year, they are slowly but surely pushing in that direction. And they're probably, I would say, within the next 5 to 8 years, they're probably going to see a schism similar to the Presbyterians and to the and to the Methodists. Like, it's coming. It's slower to work its way in, but it's happening across all of Christianity in the U.S. They are, and when I say they, I mean like the people who are subverting all forms of or everything that is culturally important. Like, they are slowly but surely working their way into destroying all of these institutions that would pose a threat and actually bring about some form of order to the chaos that they're pushing.
I think if we want to talk about where like the Nazis or like fascism in general like eventually goes wrong, it actually includes religion. One reason, like, someone asked me if someone like were to ask me if I'm like a fascist, I'd probably I would just be like, more of a Caesarist than a fascist. We can, that's a time for another show. But like, the biggest issue in my opinion with fascism is they have a more like deistic view of God. So everything is most things are about like the natural order of things and natural law, which to a large extent I agree with. But I think they maybe more view like God as acting in unison with the natural order, where God is actually in dominion over the natural order. So this is why you see things like miracles occur that seem like they go against like sort of just the natural way of things, because God can command the natural order to do whatever it wants whenever it wants. It's not necessarily like we're fascists, we're going to work in unison along with God and the natural order as like this sort of like trinity of movement. It's more like, no, God's on top and then he kind of wills all things underneath.
That makes sense. And that's, I think, a society structured around religion. It needs to have God at the top, but the church shouldn't be making a whole lot of decisions, like culture and your culture and your values and faith and family. Like, that should be what's driving the decisions, not the church. Like, that has to be at the top, is like, that's what you shoot for, is to honor and serve God. But that can't be the foundation of what's creating your structure. Like, the structure has to come from the community and the family unit not from the church. That's where it always seems to go wrong. Like if the church is working in coordination with, then it can be a good thing. But when the church is trying to drive it, then that's where it starts to get perverted. Power always corrupts. So
yeah. And we want to look at the more, I don't know, unfortunate events of that eventually happened. I think what they fell into eventually was like they found the right issues with their society, with their culture. And I think even when they came to power, they kind of were still stuck in this like victimhood mentality, right? Like even when you're in power, you're still like acting as if you're a victim to the bankers of the day, as opposed to finding more solutions other than, some things that they resorted to in order to like really wield your power in a way that you can.
saying they took the book burning a little too far.
If you want to believe that sort of thing, no.
Yeah, that was a conversation I was having with my son a couple weeks ago. Was we were talking about this sort of stuff and the lead up to World War II and what was going on, and talking about the societal and the cultural issues that they had at the time, and all of that leading to the rise of Nazism, the National Socialists, and my son just like point blank looked at me. He's like, "Are you a Nazi?" I was like, "Look, if you look at like the 30s, it makes a lot of sense. They did the things that were necessary to right the ship. If you look at the 40s, they kept doing those things to like the nth degree and went way off the deep end. And like, yeah, there was some fucked up shit. Like, so no, I'm not like a Holocaust Nazi, but maybe I would consider myself more aligned with the 1930s type of National Socialism that was a necessary thing to create or to correct the problems that existed with their society." And it's the same problem we see in our society today, unfortunately.
Yeah. As a leader, as someone in power, you can't continue on with the victim narrative, even if the victim narrative is like what helped you. And the victim narrative in this case was like they truly were like victims, like especially like the common everyday German, but you can't use that as a way to rule or to govern. And that's why we see today, like the people who are lifted up in the victim hierarchy, I mean, they still don't live. I don't want their lives. Like, even if you're someone who gets all these, gets subsidization or you get free college or whatever, like I look at them and I was like, you know what, even as a white cis male at the bottom of this ladder, I prefer my life to theirs because they're still adhering to that victim mentality, even though they're not like real victims in any way. And this is why you don't take out their loans and you don't watch their porn.
There you go. What else you got? Anything? How are we gonna wrap this thing up?
I don't know. Is there anything we didn't cover?
I feel like I think we got the important parts. If we missed anything, feel free to leave comments on the video or shoot me a message and let me know what we missed out on, or maybe
I'm trying to figure out what Magoo is posting down here.
I'm not sure. Somebody tell us what that is. Oh, that's the bell. That's the bell. He's dinging his bell.
Something about their loans and their porn, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, it's like Pete had talked about. There's a reason porn is free. They want that to be a part of society, like that. It does to whatever varying extents. It does weaken the male class, and weak males is the kind of the gateway to subverting everything else about culture and society, and setting us on the path that, I mean, we've been seeing this coming really kind of coming to fruition over the last 20 years, but it's been in the works for probably 40 or more. If you just look back at history, the 60s and 70s didn't take quite like I think they wanted it to, and then you maybe took a step back in the right direction in the 80s and early 90s, but then it turned around and it started going back in the direction of degeneracy, and maybe it was the rise of the Christian conservative caring mother in the 80s and 90s that wanted to cancel everything that was
we gotta give them props.
Yeah, as much as I hate the censorship of those times, being a comic book fan and a fan of music and art and stuff like that, and seeing some of the things that had existed at those times that then got altered because of that. At the same time, maybe that movement stemmed some of what we're seeing today. Like we might be 10 years further along into this whole experiment, and I don't know, maybe that would be a good thing. We might be closer to the end of it, but
I think our frustration, and it may just be more like intuitive than anything, with the sort of boomer conservative who spoke out against porn and like gay marriage and were definitely right in a lot of their predictions that they made, is that while porn and the other like degenerate parts of society are the explicit mechanisms like put into place, like your more implicit one is the debt-based economy. And what almost everyone in this society just accepts, like you have to take out a loan to get good credit. You need to get good credit to buy a house or to buy this other thing that you want. Like everyone just sort of accepts that the debt-based economy is maybe not a good thing, but is something that necessarily works or whatever. And we know where the debt-based economy comes from. And I was like, I've always hated debt myself, but I feel like I'm in the minority with this, where it's like my credit report keeps going down and down because I have like zero debt. People are like, well, you should probably take out a credit card. And it's like, I don't really want to participate in this debt-based economy. Like this is not a thing that I enjoy. And I think if actually more people had that mindset, then certain entities wouldn't have as much power. I think you're the same way too. Like you're Mr. No Debt guy.
I don't have no debt, but I have very, very little. Like we have 3 homes and a mortgage on 2 of them, and then we own outright. But also the way that we structure our finances and like none of those loans are big, and the way our income and the way we do the renting the other one out, basically we rent our other house and it pays everything. It pays for itself and these. So we don't, while we have the debt, we don't, it's not a debt that actually like,
you don't have 3 car payments and
right. We don't experience
14 credit cards and
we don't experience debt. We have some strategic debt, but we're not like living in debt, I guess would be the best way to put it. Like I could liquidate every bit of this tomorrow and move out into the woods somewhere and not have a single problem with that. Trey says we missed an opportunity to discuss how to right the ship without falling into the trap that the Nazis fell into. I don't know, just like use the camps, not the incinerators, right? And that's is that too simplistic?
Is that what he was driving at?
I don't know what he's driving at. We'll have to. I would invite him on the show, but we've already got our ginger quota for the day. So.
Yeah, they don't want to add too much.
Yeah. I think we covered everything. There is I never pulled it up. I have it pulled up. There's an article from The Guardian that talks about Weimar, and the title is Hedonism, Sex, and Fear, Why the Weimar Republic is in Vogue. And like this article and some of the stuff that it talks about like it covers all of the terrible parts of that society that we've talked about, except that it doesn't paint them in a negative light, and like makes it almost seem like the things that they were doing during that time were a good thing. Like it's really a shining example of what's wrong with Western media and the propagandizing of an entire society to just believe this shit is not bad. Like it's like, okay, look at all this stuff that they were doing. How wonderful this stuff was. It's like are you not connecting the dots that go forward that all of this stuff was not wonderful? All of this stuff led to some really bad shit. Several years down the road. But it also led to a complete like societal reversal just a few years down the road because people rejected this and realized that it was not good. Like, so I'll link to this in the. I'll add the link to this article in the description for the page, and it'll be in the description on the podcast itself whenever that releases. I guess that'll be on Wednesday. So yeah, anybody who wants to check the article out, feel free. It's pretty appalling, honestly. I mean, it's a good read, but it's the way they paint it is like, wow. Yeah.
I do wonder if there is going to be like a legitimate like rise of, I mean, maybe don't even call it like fascism, something like that here. If it will actually be like the Jews who are blamed again, like you said in the last show with Pete, like it doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I think that people are more like more apt to like blame the things that they see. So it might actually be more like the LGBT community, which I mean, there is some crossover there, but them who are kind of put up more as like consenting to a certain slave system or debt-based system as being more, like I said, blamed or placed on the pedestal of the reasons why we degenerated.
Oh hell no, we can't let them Jews off the hook.
I'm not saying that I would necessarily agree. I mean, I do agree that obviously the group that I mentioned is a huge player in the degenerate society, but like, I don't know. I try to talk about like some of these things with normie conservatives, and like you even bring up like the shot or whatever. You say, well, do you know who like kind of propagates these pharmaceuticals, blah blah blah, and then that's a step too far for them because such a liability shield has been built up since the 1940s, or even like bring up who started the trans movement or who provides the technology or the meds for transitioning or whatever. It's like, no, we only want to focus on the transitioning itself, not necessarily one step beyond that. So while we're heading in a certain direction that's similar, like there are things where people aren't necessarily willing to look into because of that liability shield. And I'm not sure if the way to sort of right the ship, as Trey is talking about, is to necessarily dig that deep, or do we dig that deep with certain people? I don't know. It's a question I ponder. I always get accused of things when I bring it up with, my conservative family members who were basically on the same page, but they talk about what they see, and then I delve into it, and to them, I delve a little bit too far sometimes. And this is probably the case with a lot of, the base that I was talking about earlier.
What I'm starting to find is people are starting to come around. Like,
this is why I'm like, I try to be slower and more methodical, and not just so like it's the Jews or whatever. But
yeah, you got to work your way up to that. You can't just jump in head first with that. You got to do a little priming.
And it's not all the Jews. I mean, people consent to the Jews all the time, so it's like, stop consenting to their beast system.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see who kind of catches the flack on it. I do think you're right. I do think the LGBTQ community is going to catch a lot of pushback on it. I do think there's going to be a very specific sect of the progressive left that catches some of the brunt of it.
Like media journalists and academic professors probably too.
Yeah.
Rightfully so. Let's be honest.
Right. I mean, it should be a scary time to be in academia, and that could be a reason why some of the more either conservative or just like normie professors are getting out of academia and moving towards, and like even like school teachers are getting out of the school systems and moving towards like private stuff or like these community school type things. They're getting away from the institutions, because once it does completely devolve into blame getting tossed around for why society has degenerated in such a manner, they are going to be the ones who catch the brunt of a lot of it, and probably not pleasantly. So, like, I'm not saying that it's going to be 40 style concentration camps and incinerators, but they're probably not going to have a real enjoyable time out of the pushback and the fallout of all of this.
I agree.
All right. Well, plug your thing you write from time to time.
markmetz.substack.com. There will be something this week. There's also clock management. And there is the morning after.
Tune into clock management for all of the worst possible takes you could have on picking games. If you're listening to me, like, if you listen to Mark or Tho, you're gonna get some solid picks. If you listen to me and Buck, almost guaranteed we were gonna be wrong.
I don't think that I did too well this week. I'll have to check it out.
I don't do too well any week, so
I did pick the Jets over the Steelers, though.
I don't know why I still pick games. I'm just gonna watch Mississippi State football and say fuck all the rest of it.
We should try to get Mike Leach on the show.
Yes, we should. I have him on this show too. Yeah. I'm sure he has lots of thoughts on the Jews.
I'm sure.
Anyway, hope everybody has a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week. I will be back on Sunday evening with Jason from 2-Bit Podcast, Matt Erickson of King Pilled, and Josiah. We are going to do a follow-up on the Blake Masters episode.
Nice. And
talk about how power kind of works its way out through culture and society. So that'll be a fun conversation. It'll probably be a lot less Blake Masters focused and a lot more like cultural type stuff. So
yeah, I guarantee you Blake Masters will be mentioned twice, and then Justin will sit back and listen to
I'll say his
Jay
name.
And Matt and Josiah say a whole bunch of abstract things.
I'll say Blake Masters' name, and then I'll turn it over to the three of them and just try to keep them reeled in from time to time if it gets too out in the weeds. Yeah, that's about all I got. I got another show coming up later on, but I'll plug that closer to the time because that's too far out. Everybody will forget by then. Everybody forgot about the Sunday one already. Anyway, hope everybody has a great rest of your day, great rest of your week. Tune in on Sunday, and I will see you then. Later.
Thanks, Justin.